Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We've initiated another program today in regards to the matter between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is our second program in the English language. As I have said in the previous program when we recorded it in the English language, that this matter of Afghanistan seems to be being neglected and being forgotten by the international community. So it was important that we brought this up back using the English language, although we have been raising this matter in our own Persian language, however, but it seems that the international media does not really cover the Afghanistan issue as much as it should be, given that it is as much serious as the current conflict in Ukraine and Palestine. Today, our program is based on a statement made by the interim Prime Minister of Pakistan, Anwar al-Haq Kakar, where he stated that the problems with Afghanistan will only be solved when a legitimate government is established there. So on Thursday, Anwar al-Haq Kakar, while speaking at a meeting called the Margala Dialogue in Islamabad, he added that he also defended his decision to deport Afghans without documents from the country, which we will have to debate whether these people are truly all people who belong to the Afghanistan country nation, or maybe there are factions or groups within these people that are being deliberately deported to Afghanistan under the name of Afghan citizens. Now, referring to the TTP, the Taliban and Pakistan, he said that these non-state actors threaten the security of Pakistan. He said that Pakistan is facing the threat of non-state actors. We know this, and we are preparing to give a proper response to this problem. He said, we are looking for a solution to the religious and ethnic extremism in all of Pakistan, especially in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We don't need foreign practical help in this sector. Pakistan can solve the problem by itself. Now, these words by Mr. Kakar have been deemed surprising by many political experts within Pakistan, and of course to us who are from Afghanistan, because the perception was always that the Taliban are a group meant to serve the Pakistani interest in the region. Now, suddenly they've become a problem to Pakistan's security instead of strengthening that security. The groups that he claims, such as TTP and the Balochistan Liberation Army, the BLA, he claims to be the reason for their sour relationship with the Taliban. But these organizations were not founded by the Taliban. In fact, the BLA, the Balochistan Liberation Army, predates the establishment of the Taliban itself and have been at war with Pakistan almost since its establishment as a state. So, relating the intensified attacks in Pakistan to the return of Taliban to power in Kabul does not seem to add up when you analyze all these facts. In today's program, we have invited our guest, Mr. Naser Noorzad, political and geopolitical researcher and analyst from Afghanistan, for further discussion and to provide deeper insight regarding this subject. I welcome Mr. Noorzad to our program today. And the first question I would like to put forward is, since the return of the Taliban in Kabul was perceived, even by Pakistanis themselves, that it will bring Pakistan closer to its long-term goal of asserting control over Afghanistan for its own interests, why is there a rift between Pakistan and Taliban in Kabul now? And exactly how real is this rift between the two?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for having me in this program. First of all, I may congratulate you over this innovative step that you have started, your English version also of the Fifth Republic, which are very familiar and famous among Afghanistan people. For sure, it will have its proper effect on the mindset of the audience, especially for English spoken. So getting back to your question, the recent statement asserted by the interim Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Anwar al-Haq Kakar, was itself a surprising assertion. That was unprecedented. This is the first time that a Pakistani official have such a unprecedented assertions over the Taliban. I think that we all agree that Taliban are a strategic tool in the hands of Pakistan, and since its inception, and when the Taliban movement started to have a presence in the politics of Afghanistan, the ISI, the military establishment of Pakistan, the government, the civil government, all had their proper influence over it. So the recent assertion aroused many speculation over the issue. For example, as we know that the Taliban were a strategic tools, and they have played a very crucial role of being such a close proxies to the national interests of Pakistan, especially their security interests. The Pakistani official has always had a sort of fear over Afghanistan situation, because they were in a state of besiege and was blocked by two sides, from India, from Afghanistan. So they have been pursuing such a strategic depth, which had their main three components of political strategic depth, military strategic depth, and economic strategic depth. That I will, by number, will explain all of them, which are very important to know that this term, which apparently being so much used in the media and mindset, that is strategic too. What is this? And then, okay, so I think that the first speculation which arises here is that the Pakistanis, especially the government of Pakistan, is so much disappointed with the present deed by the Taliban. The TTP's attack is growing every day, and we see a lot of attack on Pakistani military forces on daily basis. So despite many pressures and many dialogues and talks and meetings with the Taliban, the Pakistani government is so much disappointed. So they're right now trying to alter the Taliban with new forces, as there have been many speculations and rumors about forming a new inclusive government based on Pakistan by the remnants of the Republic. The second would be that the Pakistan is playing a new game. This is another speculation that the Pakistani are trying to play a new game, as the United Nations Security General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, yesterday announced a roadmap to bring the Taliban to the negotiation table, and then to undertake an inclusive constitution and invite all political parties to form an inclusive government. I think that the Pakistani are right now seeing their position in danger, and they are trying to somehow fit themselves into the new roadmap presented by the United Nations. The third one will be that the water issue is very important, as we apparently call it as hydropolitics, which is very important. And we are specifically talking about the Kunar River, which its waters flow into the Pakistani soils. And according to the estimations and the statistics that we have available right now, the Kunar water, internationally, every cubic meter of water is rated $2. So annually, we export about 30 billion cubic meters of water to Pakistan. If we calculate, we will have a sum up of $60 billion per year. So right now, the Chinese are trying to help the Taliban to build this dam. And by constructing this dam, the Taliban will be able to manage the waters of Afghanistan, which will be another blow to the economy of Pakistan. As we see that Pakistan is stacked with many economic, military, and political difficulties and stalemates. So the Pakistanis are right now are not able to pay such amount of money, $60 billion per year. Sorry. The fourth would be that the Pakistanis are totally failed to accomplish their mission and to reach their strategic debt. As we were talking previously, that the Taliban were the only available tool to implement this strategic debt. The military strategic debt to have a basis, a secure basis inside Afghan soil. In case of having any clash with the Indian army, they would easily transfer their all airplanes and maybe all the stuff that they have, and they would see it in danger. The second economic debt would be breaching to Central Asian markets, and instead make sure of security energy from Central Asia, and also having Afghanistan market, which are a very good and feasible market for the Pakistani goods. And the political strategic debt would be the having such a friendly government in Afghanistan to be careless of any kind of conspiracy, which apparently the Pakistanis are thinking that Afghans and Indians are conducting against them. The fifth would be that the Taliban are right now trying to get in contact and have some sort of interaction with the regional and extra-regional powers. I think that if the Taliban succeed to achieve this, the Pakistanis will lose their monopoly over the Taliban. So this is the major blow for the Pakistan foreign policy and their historic achievement that they have achieved after 40 years of war and destruction of Afghanistan.
Very well. The political and military crisis and economic crisis that you mentioned in Pakistan, that includes the financial crisis and, of course, the attacks by the TTP and the BLA that have intensified dramatically. It was perceived that once the Taliban came to Afghanistan, all these political and economic crises would have been handled a lot easier than they could have when the Republicans were there. For example, they had been facing criticism from the old Republic governments that was installed in Afghanistan for the past 20 years. So Taliban perceiving Pakistan perceiving Taliban as a tool to tackle these crises, I thought it would have been easier for Pakistan to, once they have installed a government such as Taliban in Afghanistan and they had their leash in their hand, it would have been easier to divert the waters that they needed from Afghanistan with a lot less cost. And when you said that China wants to build a dam in Afghanistan that would actually bring the control of these waters in the hands of the Taliban instead of the Pakistan, it also contradicts the idea that China considers Pakistan a strategic ally, given that Pakistan is the only country that allows China access to the Indian Sea through the Gwadar port, which is currently challenged by the BLA activities in Balochistan. Now, when the Taliban came to Afghanistan and the perception was that they will serve the Pakistani interest, was there a very, very big mistake from the Pakistani side to trust that the Taliban would be their top proxy group or top tool, puppet to control Afghanistan without challenge? Because as soon as the Taliban came to Afghanistan, we can see the intensified attacks that they keep blaming on Taliban, by the way. Whenever, for example, Mr. Kakar says that the attacks by the BLA and TTP have intensified because of the intervention of the Taliban in Afghanistan into Pakistan. If that is the case, how are these groups have been getting sanctuary in Pakistan for the past 20 years and more, because the Taliban's line of retreat has always been Pakistan. So in fact, that you are the one that you've been housing them for 20 years and more. You're the one who created them. You're the one who gave them everything they needed. And you are the one who helped them take over Afghanistan in a conspiracy that they together played out with Americans in Doha deal. So why take such a risk when you weren't sure that the Taliban serve your interests? But in fact, if it was that the Taliban opened diplomatic doors with Russia and Iran and India, if such a risk existed, why isn't there a balancing factor within the Taliban in order to make sure that the Taliban does not open these corridors to Pakistan's rivals, such as Iran and India? And traditionally, India has been blamed for all the activities that the TTP and the BLA specifically has in Pakistan. So today, if they are telling that the Taliban are behind all these intensified attacks, with groups that they traditionally blame Indians for. Is there a reason to believe that the Taliban may be getting a lot closer, or they have been given protection or security promises by Indians, Iranians, and Russians in order to help them out to throw this war towards Pakistan in order to divert the crisis in Central Asia and Iran?
Okay, look, in today's political atmosphere, we see a lots of dynamics, so we cannot predict that exact thing. It means that if you see a movement which is working side by side and just trying to help you to reach your objectives, tomorrow it will be your enemy. The Taliban are playing the same case. What you see today's situation in Pakistan is the leakage of their wrong policies. They have committed two major mistakes. For example, they have underestimated the danger of extremism and terrorism, that they were playing with such a tool to achieve their strategic goals. Now these terrorist groups have become so much powerful that they could put at danger any kind of security in Pakistan side. As we see that BLA and TTP are just somehow trying to get in contact. In some cases, there might have been some sort of collaboration between these two ideological forces, which are the first one is an Islamic extremist element, and the second one is a separatist element, which are fighting against the government of Pakistan. And the second, that there are many hands who are playing with the Taliban. As we see that there are the US, Britain, the European Union, other countries, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, all of them are playing with the tools of Taliban, because the only available tool which exists in the geography of Afghanistan, which has the political power, which has such a potential or potentiality, which could implement and get them to closer to their objectives, are the Taliban. So I think that contrary to the perception of the Pakistani politicians and their military establishment, the Taliban are now fragmented into different parts, and every part is being played by a separate country, by a separate power, and maybe it is regional or powers. Today, you see the major rifts between the Taliban. This is because there are many hands playing with the Taliban. And I think that the united Taliban movement is impossible. So because of the Pakistani had thought that we have a united Taliban movement, and if we help them to get into power and take the power, then they will help us to achieve our strategic goals. But today we see the contradiction, the contrary. So we see that the Pakistanis right now not only the only player in the ground, there are many players playing for their own benefits, for their own interests. And the Taliban are so much smart. They know how to use each opportunity for their own interest. So the Pakistanis right now is stacking their own plan, whether to support Taliban or to cut support from Taliban and support other groups, and then them against the Taliban. So this is the complexity of the cases which we see today in Afghanistan situation. Beside that, many regional powers, as India, as a historic rival of Pakistan, are much active. They are trying to get use of every kind of opportunity which is available to create some sort of obstacle ahead of Pakistan, is not to reach further to their strategic objectives. From the north, we see a lot of reactions by the republics, by Russian Federation, that they are somehow trying to get preparation in order not to let the Pakistani, the other terrorist groups who are being hosted by the Taliban, to have further forwards towards Asian republics.
Very well. So the idea here is that Pakistan made blunders when they brought Taliban back to Afghanistan. The two major blunders are that they brought a group into Afghanistan that they weren't in total control of. They underestimated the Taliban, and also the extremism ideology that they created in order to control Afghanistan several decades ago, and now they're being adopted by the very groups that are currently targeting the Pakistani military across major territories in Pakistan, including the Punjab itself. The BLA, the TTP may not be adopting the same ideology. By the way, the BLA may have a nationalistic view, but the TTP exactly follows the same ideology that Pakistan injected into the Taliban movement in Afghanistan a very long time ago. So it is something that they created that is turning them into victims. But talking about the elements of the elements, the powers that are currently playing in Afghanistan, we named several historical ones. India, for example, the most prominent historical enemy of Pakistan, has always been active against Pakistan, but they never had such an opportunity before because of Pakistan always had the upper hand of having access to Afghanistan, and the US funded it in order to protect it. Iran, however, although not the very new player, it has been in the game for a long time. It appears they may be a lot more active this time around because of the crisis that's currently going off around the world, especially in the Middle East. And Russia, of course, protecting its southern borders in the Central Asia, they will have to ally with Iran, which they always have, and they will have their own games to play. And of course, China in here. But the only problem that I see in this plan now is that they have brought Taliban into Afghanistan. And given that the Taliban are the only structural power that exists from a while ago, and there is no alternative to throw at them in order to beat them up, they have become the only group in Afghanistan that must be invested in. So Iran has invested a part of it. Russia has invested another part of it. China and India invested a different parts of it. Now, the problem here is Mr. Kakar says that this has turned into a security problem and that they do not need help from foreign countries in order to deal with the BLA and the TTP. Now, I understand that the problem that they are facing right now, they're not capable of handling this so far. We know that the Gwadar project is effectively sabotaged because of the BLA activities in the region. And of course, India has to do a lot with that because it is China and Pakistan at work here. Iran obviously maybe and most definitely be involved in the attacks that are currently happening in Pakistan with the help of the Indians that may have more intelligence on the ground there. Now, if the Taliban are fragmented, as we know, the Haqqani group are the only factions that we can certainly say that are totally directed by the ISI. The one group that will always be loyal to Pakistan is the Haqqani group because they are practically ISI. The other factions, however, yes, there are many factions within the Taliban that has caused this problem of controlling Taliban by one hand. Now, when we're talking about all these crises that's currently happening, and of course, you said something something that Mr. Professor Ijaz Khan from the political science professor from the Islamabad University said exactly the same thing. I'll just read that out, which he says, and I quote, "Our foreign policy is not based on political or diplomatic mentality, but we have a military method." It is correct. Pakistan has always had a military approach towards Afghanistan instead of a diplomatic one. He said that instead of being friends with Afghanistan, our policy has always been to control Afghanistan, which cannot be controlled. This is a very important point again, because historically, Afghanistan was no one was able to hold Afghanistan militarily. But in a diplomatic and political way, there was always a way to control Afghanistan. And we know this because the British India, when they existed in India, they took a diplomatic approach towards Afghanistan. And he continues and says, if the Taliban or someone else comes into power in Afghanistan, it will be difficult to be friends with them because by default, Pakistan's military approach turns them into an enemy, which is very true. Even if the Taliban are a group that are loyal to Pakistan, we know that in 2001, when the Taliban were defeated by the Americans, Pakistan had a huge hand in eliminating many of the Taliban leaders, and including imprisoning many of them in the prisons in Pakistan and in Guantanamo, including Mullah Bradar, who has spent a long time in the Pakistani prisons. So Taliban, as you said, are a smart group because they have been around for a very long time. Perhaps this time around, they have taken a different approach. As soon as they came to Afghanistan, in order to protect their stay in Afghanistan. This time, they have opened their diplomatic corridors with Russia, Iran, and India in order to balance out the threat of Pakistan from overthrowing them or change or just finding an alternative to the Taliban. So it is important for the Taliban to have these diplomatic corridors open for its own protection. Mr. Ijaz Khan, Professor Ijaz Khan continues. He says that the statement that Mr. Kakar makes about the legitimate government, calling the Taliban are not a legitimate government, he said it's a very strange statement because until now, the Pakistani officials have considered the Taliban their heroes. In fact, we know this when the Taliban came back into power, there was rejoicement all over Pakistan, especially in the top tier of the military. So he says, how did the government become illegitimate suddenly? It appears that the Taliban were legitimate for Pakistan for as long as it served the Pakistani interest. Of course, this is how the game is played. But now, as you said, that the Taliban have been fragmented into different hands, it is becoming difficult. And it appears that due to this fragmentation, we can see there's no attacks happening in Central Asia. There's little attacks happening in India. There are attacks that's happened in Iran, but they haven't been that bad that's currently happening in Pakistan. So what's happened here is that Pakistan literally threw their own tool of destruction in the hands of others, and now they're being used to throw it back at them, which many consider a natural direction because the wars, because the balance of power in the South Asian or the Indian subcontinent, the balance of power was always decided by forces that entered through Afghanistan into the North Indian plateau. So that's a very important point. So now, since Pakistan is suffering this kind of problems, are they capable of defeating TTP, the BLA, the Taliban in Afghanistan? What is going to be the future here for Pakistan? And why is Qatar always threatening the Taliban with things that they cannot control? If you are threatening the Taliban that you're going to throw the refugees out, that you're going to close the ports to the Afghani traders, how is that going to help with the attacks that are happening in Pakistan? I think it will intensify it even further. So what kind of approach is he taking here, and why is he provoking the Taliban further?
So first of all, I think that the Mr. Cocker's assertions are more mostly based on playing with the words, somehow pressurizing the Taliban to get into the bind and just be careful about the Pakistan national interest and national security interest. The second thing would be that see that the Pakistanis has always been implementing some sort of a foreign policy more militarily. We see a more militarized nature of foreign policy by the Pakistanis has been implemented toward Afghanistan. We see that in cases that Pakistan sees its interest in danger, they suddenly automatically resort to some sort of proxies, such as Taliban and other groups. And the second would be that if they see that they are failed in resorting proxies, they automatically inject some sort of new powers, instrument, tools, all the things that they need to other groups to somehow put pressures on the warring sides. So what is intending Mr. Cocker's assertion is to somehow give a message to the Taliban that still we are here and we have the capability to challenge you because there are many options also available on the ground. If we give them a green light, they would automatically get back to the table and you will have your rival standing in front of you. I think that the perception that the Pakistanis had before the Taliban came to power was to, once we achieved to establish the Taliban to political power, and we could convince them, the US and its allies, to leave Afghanistan and hand over the political power to the Taliban, then we will have no concern over Afghanistan and we will achieve our strategic depth. Now the case is contrary. We see that the many regional actors are more active than before, and they're trying to get use this opportunity to have some sort of their elements in the ground. We see that if we talk about the fragmentation and rifts among the Taliban, we see the Haqqani network, which is being directed directly by the ISI. It's a creature of ISI. Sarajin Haqqani's father was initially, since its inception, was the hand of ISI and were following their orders. And then we have a group of Qataris who are a little bit moderate and somehow willing to get in contact with the Western powers, since they opened the door for the Western power to come back to Afghanistan and make a little bit moderate Talibanized regime, which would be so weird. Then we have the Mullah Ayatollah, the so-called Ayatollah, the spiritual leader of the Taliban, which is invisible, and nobody has seen him, but he is still ruling the Taliban. And there is some speculation that whether he is under the control of Pakistanis or maybe the US or the Iranians, because previously we heard about the formation of a military similar to Supreme Courts of Iran for protecting himself, because he is strongly doubting on the uprising potentiality of the Taliban group that may create a lot of problem for his ruling, for his leadership. Then we have the Mullah Yaqub, who is apparently son of Mullah Omar, the founder of Taliban movement, who is also a very potential factor among the Taliban, and now is the acting defense minister of Taliban. He has a lot of influence over the Taliban. And then we have Elman Network. Elman Network is basically a network under the direct supervision of the Iranians. We had from Elman Network, for example, Akhtar Mansour, who was so much close to the Iranian. When he was heading back to Afghanistan, he was targeted by the US. So if we see the fragmentation between the Taliban, we see that the Pakistan is no longer able to control them as a united front, and the fragmentation has opened the way for other extra-regional and regional players to game with each fragment based on their own ideas and agendas. I think that the Pakistanis will be stacked more with more problems and challenges ahead in the years coming. But in case that we think that the Pakistan would collapse, this is not something feasible, because Pakistanis still have their special position and Western agendas. They are still a close strategic allies for the US, for the British and other European unions, because they think that Pakistan is the only smart players in the region who could implement every kind of security and political agenda in the future in the region.
Very well. You've mentioned something about alternative groups that can't take the Taliban's place. When Mr. Kakar speaks this kind of words, and it's deemed as not actually just words, but as a message that, okay, we're still here and we can still, for example, change you or give your position to somebody else. When we look at the situation in Afghanistan, who are these alternatives exactly? If we speak about the old Republican people, the Republican leaderships that are scattered across the world, some of them in Turkey, some of them are in UAE, some of them are in the Central Asian countries. If, for example, they are able to use these people to threaten Taliban's position in power in Kabul, how exactly will they be able to actually do that? Because if the Taliban are in Kabul, they have their own army, and as you said, they have the backing of different countries around them. If they threaten the Taliban with an external force, for example, calling them illegitimate, and then they will say, okay, we will threaten you with a legitimate government. Do you think that the Iranians, that it will bring the Taliban closer and closer to the Iranians, the Russians, and the Indians, and it will just be another bad decision from Pakistan? And when we speak about security, regional security, the idea is that the Taliban comes to Afghanistan and poses threat to Iran and Central Asia, for example. But we can see, as you said, that the entire plan is backfired, and instead of causing trouble for Iran and Central Asia, it's the Pakistani state that's currently in a very bad crisis in security-wise. So if the Taliban are in Afghanistan, and if you believe that an external force can be used to overthrow them or or return the government back to the Republican people, do you think that the groups that they claim to be operating under the Taliban, such as the BLA and TTP, will allow them to do this without any consequences. Maybe if they do something like that, or maybe they bring Republican forces into Islamabad and then promise them that they will throw them back into Kabul, maybe the Taliban will just intensify their attacks, and maybe there will be a direct war. Who knows? It is in the interest of the regional powers such as Iran, Russia, and India in particular to drag Pakistan into a war with a group in Afghanistan, because historically defeating a group in Afghanistan has been difficult for the Indian subcontinent governments. So if they are willing to bring these Republican forces, how will they do that? How will they arm them? Who will they be fighting? I mean, in terms of countries that will be backing Taliban. And will they win, given the current situation that Pakistan itself is facing?
Look, the first thing that the BLA never has claimed that it is operating under the Talibanized ideology. It is a different thing. As we mentioned before, it's a more nationalistic views. And the second thing, that if we're talking about some alternatives that the Pakistan and other regional powers may use against the Taliban in case they see that the Taliban is not going on the right way as they want, they have many available options. For example, they have the remnants of republics which are waiting for such opportunity to get back to Afghanistan and once again have the power, the wealth, everything, and their property that they already have left in Afghanistan. And then we have the resistance fronts, different resistance fronts which are now operating against the Taliban. We have the IS, which is a very potential existential threat to the Taliban domination. And I see that some technocrats who are waiting for such an opportunity in Western countries. They have formed many circles, political circles, and they're just trying to work and prepare an agenda for the future of Afghanistan for tomorrow. I don't know who has promised them to take them to power, but they are so much optimistic about the post-Taliban Afghanistan as they're preparing to some sort of agendas, political, economic, and military agendas for the future of Afghanistan. I think that in case that the Pakistan or other extra or regional power decided to alter the Taliban with other available options in Afghanistan, the Taliban would not be able to maintain themselves in power. They have to get to the mountains once again and seek some hideouts and then start a guerrilla war once again. I think this is not a feasible case here because the Taliban has been brought to power for some long-term strategic objectives. And I think that they're gonna maintain. I mean that the extra-regional powers are so much committed to keep the Taliban in power for long term. And if you ask about that, how they will manage to support the alternative options against the Taliban, it's easily they're gonna do the same as they did with the Taliban. They provided us safe sanctuaries for them. They trained them, provided them weapons, money, and other things, and they even orchestrated some complex terrorist operation inside Afghan soil.
So
I think that
that
the
is something
Pakistanis are right
that is
now
possible,
able to do the same thing.
if that is something possible, and it's easy to arm the old Republican groups and bring them just back to Afghanistan to form a resistance or some sort to challenge the Taliban rule, how is that going to solve the problem of TTP and BLA in Pakistan? Because they're not directly controlled by the Taliban. They're controlled by groups that are threatening Pakistan because of the return of the Taliban into Afghanistan, because they want to weaken Pakistan's hold on the Taliban as much as possible in order to prevent the exportation of terrorism towards their own regions. For example, Iran and Russia effectively or practically are at war with the United States and the European Union across the world. So if that is the case, and a Republican force can easily be armed, anyone can arm them, they can give them armies, they can give them mercenaries, they can even place them in Afghanistan to come form a front. Hell, they don't even need the Republicans. If you talked about the resistance group, they could just create resistance groups that could fight the Taliban and weaken it. But in the long term, the objective to bring the Taliban back to Afghanistan was the exportation of terrorism back towards the American rivals in the region. If they do something like bring the resistance against the Taliban, this will mean that that objective will have to be abandoned in order to protect Pakistan. That is not something the US want to fund. Pakistan is, in fact, in a problem that cannot be fixed just by bringing another group into Afghanistan. They need something to challenge TTP and the BLA. The Republican forces are not the answer for TTP and the BLA. They may be an answer for the Taliban in Afghanistan, but that does not mean that this will save Pakistan from the TTP and the BLA. It would just mean that if they bring the thousands of these Republicans back to Afghanistan, the Taliban may as well just find themselves in a golden opportunity of just unlimited resources thrown at them by the Indians, the Russians, and the Iranians in order to just kick these Republican troops back out of the country, not because they're Republicans, because they're anti-Republicans, just because these Republicans will represent the US interest in the country. The idea here is to keep the US out of Afghanistan as much as possible and try to maintain the security in the north. In the northern plateau, Taliban have no power at the moment. They may have the authority to control those territories, but the people who live there do not belong to the section of the Taliban there. There are different groups that can be used in there, for example, in Panjshir and the Rab region. We know that for 2 years, the Taliban battled out the Panjshiris and the Andarabis in the Hindu Kush mountains, and they failed to take those strongholds. This cannot be done without foreign support. No one can go against a structured group like the Taliban unless there is heavy support. If, for example, the Republicans do come to Afghanistan and open a front from Kandahar, from Kabul, Bagram, or whatever, that does not mean that they could actually liberate the whole of Afghanistan. This could just mean another war within the country, and it would just mean that Pakistan will have to be involved in a war that is against the rest of the regional powers because they are representing America. I think for Pakistan, a logical way of getting out of this is to just abandon American interests and bound itself to Russians and Chinese and the Iranians in the region in order to receive help from them in order to stop the TTP and the BLA. The BLA and TTP represent these powers around it, especially India. And I think India will never abandon the opportunity to pressurize Pakistan forever, because even if there is a chance that Pakistan could ally with Russia and Iran, they will never be allies with India. And India will never abandon the BLA and the TTP support. But at least if they give up the idea of threatening Iran and Russia, they may be able to come into a deal where they will help them to decrease these attacks, maybe give them a little bit of stability that they've currently lost. In the way they're going right now, Pakistan is literally facing an existential threat because without Punjab and Sindh and Gilgit-Baltistan, half of Pakistan is at war. Literally, the territories are at war. The TTP is inflicting casualties on the military. The BLA have been doing it for 75 years, and they have intensified and not gone away. And we know that this will get worse and worse if they keep pushing the threat of exporting terrorism towards Central Asia and Iran, because they will in turn fund even more battles and conflicts in Pakistan. Will Pakistan be around to continue this push if they keep pushing these people? Because at the moment, Pakistan is not the only master of terrorism in the region. The same ideology, the same factories are in Iran, in India, in Russia. They know how to create these groups. They know how to manage them and fund them. Pakistan used to do this because they invented the very business idea. But now they are not the only ones doing this. So is Pakistan going to survive this? Even if we believe that if they bring the Republican forces back into Afghanistan, what is the point? The original objective was to export terrorism back towards Central Asia and Iran. So if they want to get rid of the Taliban, that means that they will have to abandon that, and just funding any war against the Taliban is just basically useless after that.
So first, we are talking about the hypothesis, the probabilities, the possibilities. We're not saying that the exact thing would happen. If we see that the remnants of the republic could be an available option, we see a lot of other available options which are on the ground, and we do not know about them. The second thing would be that if the Taliban government at the end of the day is not able to meet those security needs of Pakistan military establishment, or maybe entire Pakistani government, and there is another alternative for the Taliban, and the Taliban is no longer in power, the BLA which we don't have any exact proof that are in direct connection with the Taliban, or maybe especially the TTP is now has made a strategic alliance with the Taliban ideologically. They will not have such a well-organized, structured, and established government, which is the Taliban government, providing them all the necessary things to continue their war against the Pakistani military forces. And then we see that we cannot ignore this fact that the Pakistan is currently under a direct security dynamic, which means that the Pakistan is now experiencing something worse than that it had predicted. We see that the Pakistani thought that once the Taliban is power, then they remove all their security concerns. But now see the case is contrary. I think that in today's atmosphere, the political and security dynamics are more effective than our plans. If we see that lots of regional, extra-regionals are playing a big agendas, and we have such a problematic countries who are stuck with many challenges, such as Pakistan, are not able to defend themselves in the short term. Maybe they, in some part in the future, may interact with the regional powers to get into the agenda and just get rid of that challenges which has been created by extra-regionals. I think that the Taliban is still a viable option for the Pakistanis. This is just a sort of assertion made by the acting or interim Prime Minister of Pakistan. We have another shadow political system, which is the Pakistani military establishment. The political Pakistan military establishment is the one who decides what to do, what to not. And I see and we see that the whole experience that we have been through is showing that the Pakistani military establishment is the decision maker, and they're gonna find ways how to tackle Taliban's problem. And if they realize that there are some elements who are supporting the TTP or maybe the BLA, they may remove them from the power. One thing more, that if we talk about the relations between the Indian and the BLA, maybe in somehow, but the TTP, we don't have any exact evidences over this. We cannot exactly claim that, yes, India is behind this.
Well, the only evidence that we have about that is because the Pakistanis claim that the TTP is being backed by the Indians with the help of the Taliban. That was the only claim they've made so far.
Yeah, this is a blame game. A blame game is more common in the world of politics. Yeah. If you have any failure, you would put the blame on others and just in order to excuse yourself. This is the only thing. This is a political tactic to minimize the level of pressure, the public opinion over your government. I think this is a normal thing, but it cannot prove that the Indians are behind these attacks. We still see a lot of dynamics and changes in the situation, but I think that still the government of Pakistan, and especially their military establishment, is dominant in the situation. They are stable. They have under control the situation. We see a lot of attacks being carried out by the TTP or BLE. It's a normal thing. And I think that the Pakistanis, since their reception, their creation of the creation of Pakistan in 1947, they have had two problems. The first one, having problems with the government and different political system in Afghanistan. The second would be nationalistic ideas and Islamic extremism, which some part of time it was created and nourished by the military establishment of Pakistan. Now it has turned their gun to the head of Pakistanis and somehow being used against them. But we don't know who are using these elements against Pakistan. Still, I think it's too early to prognosticate and predict that who are doing this in the situation. However, we consider Pakistan as dominant player in the situation.
Of course, there cannot be a certain or an exact 100% analysis here to blame anyone or relate anything to anyone especially in an intelligence kind of war that's currently happening, of course, in Afghanistan for the past at least half a century. the only thing we can do is make logical assessments of who and which groups could actually benefit from such attacks. If, for example, we even assume that the BLA and the TTP are not funded or backed by the Indians, they may be backed by some other group that feel the benefit comes from them. But logically, you can actually feel that if such a group exists, that such a threat exists, even if the Indians are not directly related to it, they may be able to help to fund it or help it in a way so it can become a threat to Pakistan. So the gameplay of India against Pakistan can never be just ignored, because we know that Pakistan's greatest enemy is the Indian state, because they know each other by blood and by language and everything than the rest of us. Of course, Afghanistan has experience with Pakistan, but unfortunately, Afghanistan never learned to actually understand Pakistan. And that is the reason why we have such crisis where we're not in control of anything in our own country. But the problem that Pakistan faces here is exactly the same thing. In a country that no one knows how to control it, especially internally, it will always be directed from the outer force against another outer force. And that's what's happening right now with Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Taliban may be a threat to Pakistan. They may actually be Pakistan's golden opportunity, which it can be either or can be both at the same time, because that's what the intelligence game is. But we cannot ignore the fact that the very military establishment or military nature of Pakistan is the reason that Pakistan is facing such a crisis. A country with over 200 million population is under economic crisis. They're suffering security crises where they have attacks happening every day. They have casualties more than they've had a decade ago when the Republicans in Afghanistan were in power, which could indicate that the stability of Pakistan was much more better when the Republicans were in Afghanistan, because they had no such establishment or structure to threaten Pakistan. The US was in Afghanistan, they will always protect Pakistan. But now that the Taliban are there and presumably the Taliban are getting out of hand, it is logical to only assume that the only way Iran, Russia, India can get rid of any threats from the region of Afghanistan is to either export that threat towards Pakistan or get rid of the Pakistani military establishment as a whole. The only two reasons I can see, the only way I can see that these countries can avert the threat from Afghanistan is to defeat Pakistan internally. Thank you, Mr. Noorzad. Please have your say.
The only thing that I want to add to your comments, that we see three versions of Taliban. The first version, which was created since its inception in 1990s. Then the second one during the war against the US and the republics. And now we see a more sort of changed version of the Taliban, who are so much smart and a little bit modernized. But they, in order to maintain them in power, they keep their ideology. And there are many plausible deniability that we see a lot of difference of opinion between the Taliban, and this has led them to refer to different regional and extra-regional powers in order to have their own benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Noorzad, for political researcher and geopolitical analyst, for attending this program today. We will have more programs like this in the future, because as you may also analyze through our debate today, of course, I'm speaking to the audience here, is that the situation of Afghanistan and Pakistan has reached certain complexities that is hard for either side to predict which way it is going. And only through deep discussions can we reach a certain point, or maybe closer to some probability or possibility that could happen in the future. I once again thank the audience and Mr. Noorzad for attending this program. Have a good day, everyone. We'll have programs in the future for you.